Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 57th level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Turford, the man on the moose, the level 99 human archmage, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf medic who actually leveled up in real life yesterday, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing on this lovely, lovely Tuesday evening? It's Tuesday, by the way, because it was Garrett's birthday yesterday. So say, everyone in the chat, say happy birthday to Garret, because it was Garrett's birthday yesterday. It's very exciting.
Thank you so much. Yes, I leveled up in real life. I can't believe it. Next stage, and we just keep on going. I've realized that. So, but everything's going good. I had a good birthday. It was pretty chill. Yeah, and I think I just wanted to celebrate yesterday, so that's why we didn't record yesterday. But definitely here, definitely in for it for today. I'm very excited what we're about to talk about in this episode. How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing well as well. You know, I figured you, of all people, would be hyped for this one. I know this is one you've wanted to talk about forever, and we've been holding it off because we knew Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is coming this week. We're like 4 days away. We're almost 3 days away when, the clock strikes midnight while we're, recording this from Xenoblade Chronicles 3 being in our hands. But of course, we got to celebrate it the best way we know how, of course. Talking about Xenoblade Chronicles, the series, which back also on our fan poll that we did, the survey that we did, this was one of the recommendations. People really wanted us to do a Xenoblade episode. So we are also...
We'll do it.
We are not only just making Garret Bland very happy with this, but we're also making you, the fans, very happy with this as well. So thank you very much to everyone who gave us that suggestion. We had a couple of people suggest Xenoblade.
Thank you.
Yeah. But before we get into all that, Garret, we got to clean the garage or the dungeon, depending on what show you're actually doing, in order to get the show started.
Pesky mobs.
So, number one, if you like the show and you like what we do and you're watching the live stream right now on youtube.com/carpoolgaming, or if you're watching the video on demand, because I know this is pretty late for a lot of people, you can make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, don't forget to hit that notification bell to be notified whenever we go live with our new videos or when we have a new live stream, like the surprise live stream that's happening on Thursday, because it's Sean Capri's birthday on Thursday, and Sean's doing a live stream from 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Yes, Sean, I did that for you, even though I always say Eastern Standard Time. So on Thursday, come hang out. We're going to be having fun with the community all day on Thursday, so you can check us out. Or the Xbox Drive hits 250 episodes tomorrow, and we're giving away 250 games.
Oh, dang.
So that'll be a fun episode.
That's a lot of games
to chill out for. Well,
that's like what the .io store. Like, you got 976 games for like 2 cents. It's kind of like that.
The best part is
so many.
We've talked about this on other shows before, Garret, but we have actually like a spreadsheet of, giveaway codes, and there's like 2,000 codes on there. So this just barely puts a dent in that. So like expect more weird and crazy stuff like this happening soon. But if you want 250 Xbox games and you're watching right now, go over to our Twitter at Carpool Gaming right now. Go enter, because it's a lot of games and there's a lot of good ones in there.
Do it.
So definitely make sure to enter for that.
A lot of great ones.
Also, if you're listening on audio feeds, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, don't forget to rate us there as well. Also, if you want this show a little bit early, or just the plethora of exclusive content over on Patreon, head over to patreon.com/carpoolgaming. Throw a little tip in the old tip jar, and out comes content, including the Geek Outs. Scott Pilgrim, our read-along section, has hit the halfway point. We're pretty close to the end of that series, and that's been super fun to do with Sean, so check us out there. And then last but not least, if you want an RPG Cave t-shirt or any of our other merch, head on over to our merch store, bit.ly/CPG merch. And actually, because we're a partner on YouTube now, you'll actually be able to see the merch start to pop up on the YouTube page fairly soon. It's not up there yet, but probably pretty soon you'll actually be able to buy it straight from the YouTube channel, which is awesome. So check us out there as well. Without further ado, though, Garret, I am not going to prolong this any further. It's time to read from the sacred texts, because it is time to talk about Xenoblade Chronicles. And no, we're not just talking about the first game. We're just talking about the series Xenoblade Chronicles, because again, we want to touch on all the games and give them their fair justice. Even though I haven't played all the games, definitely of the two of us, Garrett's definitely the expert on Xenoblade between the two of us.
I played more.
Yeah, for sure. So real quick, Garrett, I'm going to ask the question I always ask when we cover a series like this first, before I get into fun facts, which is,
Okay.
where did you get your start with Xenoblade? Like, what game did you start with?
So I started with actually Xenoblade Chronicles 1. And actually, I started with that one on the 3DS. So when I got the new 3DS XL, I decided, hey, there's an exclusive RPG that's ported from the Wii that I heard is super cool. That's called Xenoblade Chronicles. I'm going to try it out on the 3DS. And that's what I did for probably, I don't know, like 5 or 6 hours or so. And I'm like, yeah, this is really hard to look at everything that's going on in this screen.
Yeah.
It's very pixelated. I forgot what the resolution of that thing was. It must have been like 300, 400p or something like that.
No, it's even smaller than that. I
240p?
actually think it's 240p, I believe. Yeah. Which is just,
oh my goodness, guys, put your quality on a 240p in a YouTube video. That's what it looks like. It's just a pixelated mess.
Or if you just plug in any old console with your composite cable, or your composite cables, like your red and white cables, like that exports in 240p as well. So same resolution as the NES, Garrett.
The same resolution as the NES. That's wonderful. But yeah, I started out with that. I kind of gave up on it just because I think it's really hard on the 3DS to like look at everything. I was actually a good chunk of the way in. I was probably maybe 7 or 8 hours into it. But like, man, dude, the 3DS one, it was like trying to scope out this big world. And I'm like, I cannot see myself. I literally don't know where I am. So I kind of gave up with Xenoblade Chronicles 1 on the 3DS. Then I went and got on the Switch. I did get Xenoblade Chronicles 2 very early, like I think it was close to holiday 2017. But I didn't really get into it until I actually got Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition back in 2020. And I beat the whole game there, plus Future Connected. And then I just recently beat Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and very close to finishing up Torna. So I'm more of a recent Xenoblade fan than I think a lot of other people that have been playing this series for a good while, maybe ever since, it came out on the Wii back in, 2007 or something like that. But yeah, it's been good. Yeah, that's basically my story. What about you?
So I actually started with the first one as well, but I played it on the Wii because I was one of those people that, we'll talk about, the history of that game in just a second, but I just, after everything that game went through to even come out in North America, and I liked the Xeno Saga games, I was like, okay, I want to give this game a try. And man, if you want to talk about an ugly game on a console, the Wii version of Xenoblade Chronicles is also not very good to look at either, for much of the same reason where, again, we've got this giant world that it's trying to portray, but the Wii is not the console for that, especially because of the draw distance in particular just kind of ruined the experience. And the combat just wasn't as fun on the Wii version versus playing the definitive version on the Switch for the original Xenoblade. So that's where I got my start. I did actually end up getting a copy of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, full disclosure, from Nintendo for review.
Oh wow!
When it came out on Switch, because that was around the time when I was on Game Moose and we reviewed Nintendo games there. So I did play it that way, but I never finished it. We also didn't have it ahead of time either. It was we got it the day it came out. So we were not. I wasn't super incentivized to keep going with it. So one of my, podcast, the other podcast members ended up actually taking on the review from me. But I think my issue with Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I've talked about it many times, is just how it runs on Switch is not, ideal. Yeah. It definitely runs better than Xenoblade Chronicles on the 3DS or on the Wii does, but it's still just not a step in the right direction. I mean, it did the fact that it felt like they took a step backwards in the way that game felt versus, playing a game like Xeno Saga on the PlayStation 2 was just, it kind of hurt me a little bit. So it kind of scared me off that game. But so, I'm definitely someone that's been on the periphery with Xenoblade Chronicles games, but there's one that I really got into that we'll talk about in a little bit. So I want to save that for later when we get to that particular game. But Garrett,
sounds good.
I think it's time for me to hit you with some fun facts before I kind of let you take
Hit me
the
with those fun
lead
facts
on this show. So first off, we talked at least a little bit about the history of Xenoblade Chronicles on the Monolith Soft episode that we did a long time ago. So if you want to hear kind of us go more into the history of Xenoblade Chronicles development, including, talking about the first game in particular a lot, you can go back and listen to that episode because we did talk about it a lot there. And it's actually like our most played episode as well. So I know a lot of people have checked that out as well. But Xenoblade Chronicles itself is technically part of the Xeno series, but none of the games are necessarily connected together or anything like that. So the Xeno series, for those that are unfamiliar, includes Xenogears, which is on the PlayStation 1, which is owned by Square Enix, and then the Xeno Saga trilogy, which is on PlayStation 2 and owned by Bandai Namco, and then, of course, Xenoblade Chronicles, owned by Nintendo on the Switch, which is just the weirdest thing to think about.
Monolith is just out here. It's like, here, Bandai, you can have my Xeno series. Here, Square Enix, you can have my Xeno series. It's just like, it's so weird that, you have this weird Xeno kind of prefix word in all of these series, and they're just kind of just disparate in all of these companies, and it's all just made by Monolith.
Exactly. Well, I mean,
Monolith
it's almost
Soft,
like you can tell it's a Monolith Soft game if it's got Xeno in the title. Like that's almost like their moniker, rather than looking at the company name in the copyright section on the box or on the title screen or whatever. Which is interesting. Although, as we talked about in the Monolith Soft episode, they made a whole bunch of other games that aren't Xeno games, like Project X Code or Namco Cross Capcom or Batten Kaidos and stuff like that. So there's a whole bunch of other games that they made that aren't, in this chain. But what kind of ties all these games together is, even though they don't take place in the same universe or anything like that, and they don't have crossover characters except for a couple that we'll talk about, because we actually had a question about this, there is one thing that kind of links them together, and that's kind of some of the themes that are in some of these games, or likewise a game like Xenoblade Chronicles X, which is like a spiritual successor to Xenogears in particular. So there are examples where they're, similar in style, or they feel like spiritual successors, but they're not really like, they're more like Final Fantasy, where they have similar elements, but they have different characters, different worlds, and just different aspects to them. Is how I would think.
Yeah. It's interesting that they chose the word Xeno, because I just looked up that prefix word, and it's meaning alien, strange, or guest. So something otherworldly, something alien, something outside. That's an interesting word to go by with all of these games. It kind of fits with Xenoblade Chronicles. I don't know about the other games.
Well, they're all sci-fi games.
Yeah.
So that kind of
they're all
sense.
sci-fi games. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Because
Fits in with that
Xenogears
thing.
is like a mech fighting, almost like a Gundam RPG in a lot of ways. It's turn-based. It's got mechs. It's got anime cutscenes, and it's very spacey. And then Xeno Saga is very much in outer space. That feels actually closer to something like Star Trek more than anything. So. Yeah, that's.
And I would say Xenoblade Chronicles is the most down to earth then compared to those games.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you're not really traveling to different planets in this game or anything like that, like you're doing in Xeno Saga or Xenogears. So, but after Monolith Soft's purchase by Nintendo in 2007, which was actually driven by the commercial failure of Xeno Saga, because as much as I like those games, they did not sell well, even though they made 3 of them. They tried to get people into them, but it was too much. They actually immediately started development on a new game. The idea for the game came from Monolith Soft employee Tetsuya Takahashi's concept of people living on the backs of these large creatures. And we talked about this back on the Monolith Soft episode, but when he had this idea, he was having a hard time kind of, explain the concept to the team. So they actually built models of like the two, alien, the two like titans that you're walking on the back of in the original Xenoblade Chronicles, as like these wooden models. And there's pictures of them on the internet. You can go check them out because they look really, really, really cool. Some of the development shots that they came up with for this game. So I love that idea that it came from this like crazy idea in his head that, hey, these people just live off the backs of these two titans, and that's the worlds that they live on. So the game itself wasn't originally going to be called Xenoblade Chronicles. It was actually originally going to be called Monado: Beginning of the World. But the game was actually renamed to Xenoblade Chronicles as a suggestion by Satoru Iwata to honor the team's legacy and their work. And it was almost like Nintendo kind of giving them the green light. Hey, we know this isn't super connected to the other Xeno games, but like, you know, your hard work and dedication on this project, as well as helping Nintendo with other stuff, we want to reward you by letting you having this it be part of this series of games, which is interesting. But so
cool.
Xenoblade Chronicles itself started development in 2007, as I mentioned, and it arrived on the Wii in Japan on June 10th, 2010. The North American version, however, would take almost 2 years to release, and it came out on April 6th, 2012, thanks to a fan movement called Operation Rainfall to get this game localized. There was like a trio of games on the Wii that were all RPGs that didn't look like they were ever going to come to North America at all. So there was this giant fan petition called Operation Rainfall. It was this whole big internet movement to kind of get these over. And after Nintendo saw this demand, they said, okay, we'll bring these games over, and if they don't sell, it's your guys' fault, and don't expect any more of them. And 2 of the 3 of them never received sequels, because, again, we got Xenoblade Chronicles, which we know obviously got sequels, but then we had The Last Story, which was made by some like ex-Square Enix employees who worked on Final Fantasy. And then we also got Pandora's Tower as well, which is almost like a horror RPG. It's actually a pretty interesting game too. But these games were in super low print runs, as Nintendo does. Like, they were very, very hard to find. Like, I remember going to GameStop or EB Games here in Canada at the time and trying to find a copy of Xenoblade Chronicles. And the reason you had to go to EB Games was it was an EB Games / GameStop exclusive in North America. They didn't sell it at any other retailer. You had to go there. You couldn't pre-order it either. So you had to physically show up the day that it went on sale and hope you got one. Because, like, most stores got, like, 5 copies. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. It was actually, like, the Wii version of Xenoblade Chronicles was super rare for a long time. It was actually a very expensive game if you wanted to pick it up on eBay, because it was a game in high demand, you know, way before the 3DS version or the Switch version came out. And it was in low print run. It had a similar situation to the Metroid Prime trilogy when they did that re-release for the Wii, which also had this like steelbook case on it. And they made that like super limited. I think like stores got like 3 per store, and it was also EB Games exclusive. So it's just like Nintendo was doing some ridiculous stuff with the Wii at the time. And it made me very sad. But luckily, after a couple of reprints that they went back, because after Xenoblade Chronicles sold so well, Nintendo went back and reprinted more and more and more of them. And so that we definitely got more of them out in the wild, to the point now where if you want the original Xenoblade Chronicles on Wii, it's actually not that expensive of a game, which is nice.
That sounds good. I actually did not know it came out so late in 2012.
Yeah.
That's like after the 3DS release.
Yeah.
That's like after Skyrim release.
It was one of the last it was one of the last releases on the Wii at all.
Yes.
And
I had a Wii, so I could have grabbed this, but I guess I just didn't know what I was not into this. I was like, I had no idea what Xenoblade Chronicles was until the 3DS, so pretty interesting.
I had only heard rumblings on because like 2011 was when I first started really getting into podcasts. And at the time I was listening to stuff like IGN Games Group and stuff like that, and they were talking about they were chronicling the whole movement that was Operation Rainfall, and it was a really like interesting story to learn about, and how like the fans or the ones that actually got this game to come out here they were so loud they got the attention of Nintendo at a time where we just didn't really see stuff like this, because you have to remember that like Twitter was around at this time, but this was well before people were taking to Twitter to yell at publishers or developers.
That's true.
Were really just asking for anything. So it was just a really interesting scenario about how this came to North America. So there you go. That's a little history lesson on how it came here. Of course, as Garrett mentioned, it did also get a 3DS iteration on April 10th, 2015 in North America. And then we have, of course, got the remake on the Switch called Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition on May 29th, 2020. So that's kind of your history lesson about the original Xenoblade Chronicles. I'll talk more about a little bit about the history of some of the other games as we get to them, because I want us to talk about some of the games. But before we get into that as well, and before we start breaking down Xenoblade Chronicles, I have a couple questions from the community, Garrett, that I want us to tackle now.
Let's do it.
Because it feels like this is like a fitting time to ask some of these. So number one comes to us from Mike at BlazeKnight0923, who asked the question, do these games relate to the Xeno Saga games at all? I want to play as Kos Mos again. And even though someone on Twitter actually already answered this for Mike, Kos Mos is actually an unlockable sword in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. So you can have Kos Mos that way, but that's it. Otherwise, no other characters really cross over, and it's not really similar.
There's absolutely no connection. And Kos Mos is the rarest blade to get in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, so good luck.
Yeah.
Try to summoning Kos Mos, because it'll take probably more than a playthrough's time through Xenoblade Chronicles 2 to get Kos Mos.
It's fine. It's not that long. I'm sure Xenoblade Chronicles 2 isn't a long game, as I say, laughing while I'm saying that, Garrett. Good God. Well, we've also got Skycatcher Gaming on the Discord, who asked the question, Xenoblade versus Star Ocean versus Phantasy Star, which one is the best series? I haven't played any of them with the exception of like 2 hours of Xenoblade Chronicles 2. They all seem like the same kind of game. Well, I'm here to
That's an interesting observation.
I'm here to correct you at least a little bit, Skycatcher Games, because they're actually pretty different from each other. First of all, like Star Ocean and Phantasy Star are the most similar between the three of them, because Phantasy Star has a lot of space exploration in it. It's closer to something like Xeno Saga is as far as its story is concerned, and Star Ocean's kind of in the same boat as well, especially with like the new Star Ocean that looks like it's coming out later this year. Like that game looks like there's a lot of space traveling in that game too. So they're very different thematically, but even gameplay wise, all three of them are very different from each other, because Xenoblade is like a turn-based, it's almost like an MMO in a lot of ways, where it's
very much like an MMO. Yeah.
You've got like automated combat, and then you've got skills that you activate. Whereas Star Ocean is very much an action RPG series. It always very much has been since the original on the PlayStation 1. And then Phantasy Star has started out as turn-based, and then it became an MMO after that. So,
Phantasy Star Online, yep.
Yeah, so all three of those are like very different from each other. Garrett, I know you've only really played Xenoblade of the three, right? So you haven't really played too much of Star Ocean or Phantasy Star?
I played a little bit of Phantasy Star Online. I was not digging it at all compared to other MMOs. Star Ocean has been so elusive to me. Every time I see a Star Ocean game, it's like, where do I start? It's like, well, you can start here, you can start there, you can start there. It's just like, I think I'm good. I will play other role-playing games. And Star Ocean seemed one of the more obtuse JRPGs than like the ones that I really need to get to, like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and stuff like that. So yeah, Star Ocean has never been the top of my list, and the recent games haven't been reviewing very well. So
it's a very niche series. It's not like super popular. It's one of Square Enix's properties that is on what I would consider on like the lower tier as far as popularity is concerned,
like C tier.
But they're also like hit or miss, because again, some of the Star Ocean games are really good, and some of them are integrity and faithlessness, which is not good at all. But
you just don't want to play it, no.
But I would say, like, if this game that comes out this year comes out, I actually would say for people who want to get started with Star Ocean, that's probably the place to start, because it's kind of like Xenoblade,
definitely,
where they're not. Well, actually, it's not like Xenoblade at all. It's more like the Xeno series, where it's not really connected. It's more like Final Fantasy, where each games are kind of independent from each other. So you could jump in that way. And with Phantasy Star, if anyone's out there who wants to get into Phantasy Star, honestly, I would just go on Nintendo Switch Online and just play the Phantasy Star games.
Play the Phantasy Star games in there.
On there, because they're really good. Or, download Phantasy Star 1, which is a Sega Ages game on the Switch. I think it usually is on sale for $1. That's a Master System game, but it's a really good RPG. It's turn-based, but it's really good. So Phantasy Star, nice. I think, like, if you don't like MMOs, like, go back and play the old games. They're still great. They still play great today. They have incredible music and visuals, so go check those out. But for me, I mean, I personally have more attachment of the three to Phantasy Star, because I do love those Genesis games and the Master System original. But I know, Garrett, you're probably like, all about Xenoblade on this list. So there you go.
Yes, definitely. But it's an interesting observation. They like maybe same type of game he meant like it looks otherworldly, you
Right.
know, like all of them do. I know Star Ocean Phantasy Star definitely has more space exploration focused. But yeah, they all seem pretty alien or explorative and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So interesting observation
But that's
there
also saying like a game
for sure.
like Half-Life and Halo are like the same type of game because they both have space alien stuff in them, which
Yeah,
is not that close. So that I would say that kind of comparison is how I would compare these together as well. So
sounds good.
there you go. Well, let's start off talking about Xenoblade Chronicles, the original Garret, because this is the one where
Cool.
definitely we played the most of. Again, I mentioned
Yes, we
before,
did.
I've never finished it, and you just finished it pretty recently, right?
Yes, I beat it back in 2020. And actually, me and Sean Capri had a full review of it back in the day. So go check that out. We had a really good time together of just hacking it out with Xenoblade Chronicles, the definitive edition, and it was our first time both playing it, and we just went through like everything. So. But yeah, it was definitely one of my favorite games of 2020. I really enjoyed it. Um, did you play the definitive edition? I guess
Yeah,
a little bit on Switch.
I
Okay,
never
cool.
finished that one, but I got pretty far in it. I really like that game. I actually think, of the Xenoblade games I played, it's one of my favorites. Although, again, I'll talk about my actual favorite one pretty soon. But
Yeah.
I like Xenoblade Chronicles a lot. And again, I think the Switch Definitive Edition is the way it should have been from the beginning. Like I think that
Yes.
it's such a great version of that game versus the two troubled versions that we talked about earlier. And I think that if more people would have started with that one, especially because it's weird that it came out after Xenoblade Chronicles 2, that I think more people would probably be in this series if it came out first before Xenoblade Chronicles
Yeah.
2, or if this is the version we got originally. Like, I think it would be really cool. People would just be more into this. But I like this game a lot. Like, I do think, though, there's some outdated elements to it. For example, there's like a bajillion side quests in this game, which is something I don't personally love. Like, if you read into the development of this game, like, they really were trying to take Western RPG design elements and infuse them with a JRPG, and that's very much what they tried to do the Witcher thing with like a bajillion side quests, which for me personally, it doesn't appeal to me. But Garrett, I think you're more open to that type of game.
Yeah, I think the side quests in Xenoblade Chronicles 1, it was a lot of fetch quests, a lot of things that are very subsurface level. It didn't really, it wasn't required unless you wanted to level up a lot compared to like the main story. And I think that's one of the drawbacks of this game in this series. I don't think Monolith Soft really understands the leveling system compared to its combat and the pacing. Unless you are a JRPG fan and you spend tens and to hundreds of hours wanting to get into side quests, you will have no problem, going back to the main story and kind of beating the certain bosses, whatever. But even for me, I struggled going through this game if I didn't side quest, if I didn't do other extra things, if I didn't pull it back a difficulty down. Like sometimes I had to make those concessions to even get through the game, but that's one of the negatives. But I want to speak about the huge positives of this game. As you said, it was Western role-playing game elements smashed into a JRPG world. I think what really captivated me in this game was its big, vast open areas. Especially, and of course, the synopsis of Xenoblade Chronicles 1, there are two titans that are at war with each other, and there's factions on these titans. These titans are these big, huge, mythical creatures that are kind of like Earth-like objects in a way, and they look like mechs from a distance. And then you have humans and other type of species kind of living on there. And so kind of the world around it, they build around that world on those two titans, and they make it so open, so big. It makes it feel like full of life. There's a lot of different vast areas from beginning to end. There's grasslands, there's volcanoes, there's rocks. And I think that's what they initially wanted to bring out in that game, is just how diverse and the biomes can be, how different they can be. And then they put in the music, and then they put in so many different areas into this huge open area in all of these games. Yeah, I think that's what really shines in Xenoblade Chronicles 1. And 2 a little bit, but more so for 1.
Yeah.
Do you have anything more to speak on that?
No, actually, I think you nailed it. In fact, it was interesting because, going into Xenoblade Chronicles, like hearing, the plot synopsis of the game before I played it, I thought I was a little bit worried that, you'd go into a game like this and it would almost feel like Final Fantasy 13 where you would be running in a straight line because you'd be so confined. Because I figured, oh, well, if you're on the back of this, giant thing, how big could that actually be? How big could this world actually be? But, you get, after you get out of kind of like the tutorial area at the beginning, like you've got so much area to go and explore and do other things with. And to your point, Garrett, about Xenoblade Chronicles 2, like that's one of the things I didn't love as much about the second game, where it almost felt like it was going like too sky piratey for me, where it was more like,
it was
traveling, from place to place above the clouds, versus I liked more of like almost having like this like Earth-like place, but just on the back of this, giant Titan in Xenoblade Chronicles, the original. So
yeah,
that's one of the things I liked about it. Also,
so
sorry, go ahead, Garrett.
No, you go ahead. What did you like about Xenoblade Chronicles?
So the other thing I wanted to transition to as well is I really like the characters and the story in the original as well. Like I like, the writing a lot in the first game. And I think it's honestly, I think of all the games, I think it's probably the strongest one when it comes to that. Although you might argue against me maybe with something like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 or Torna. But I really like the story in the first one as well. Like I really got into it. Like the only reason I never ended up finishing it was I had put it down once and I never went back to it. And I feel like if I go back to it again, I'd have to pretty much start over from the beginning, I think, because it's been so long since I played it. But I just, really, really got it sucked into the world and the story in a big way. So I actually think a lot of that stuff is really good. I also like the voice acting as well. I know kind of like the British voice acting, like the British accents are kind of like a turn off for some people. But I don't know. I liked it because you don't really get, that style of voice in a lot of games. Like a lot of, JRPGs, they get localized. They're, very, American sounding voices in your JRPG. Whereas this time around, they tried to go for, European accents for a lot of the characters, which I liked.
Yeah, I'll speak more about the characters and story. Xenoblade Chronicles 1 really impressed me from beginning to end. The story is very coherent. It delivers really well. The writing is fantastic. And the characters are so endearing. Like as you go throughout your adventure, you're kind of trying to resolve this conflict or this war that's battling out, and you're chasing down these certain people in the beginning of the game. And from beginning to end, though, like the cutscenes, the animations, and like the delivery of dialogue and all of these characters, very well done, and made me grow really close to these characters, especially Shulk, the main character. I love how they put in enough information for you to understand the story, but you're still not sure what it actually is in the end. Like you don't know until the very end of the game. Same thing happens with Xenoblade Chronicles 2. You go out through this story and you're like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm definitely excited to hear what's happening next. And they break down into certain chapters in both games. And so they do a pretty good job. It's like, oh, I'm done with chapter 1. Let me dive into chapter 2 and like figure out what's the next step and what's the next role. And then especially these cutscenes that are in Xenoblade Chronicles 1, the animations, I got emotional on a lot of these characters and a lot of these scenes. They pull in plot twists. The villains are ruthless. And like the adventure is just like hectic. It's definitely like one of the better JRPG stories I've ever played, for sure. Yeah.
And that very much comes from, the development of games like Xeno Saga, because one of the things that the Xeno Saga games in particular are very famous for are their giant cutscenes, because they have like super long cutscenes. I think there's one cutscene in one of the games, I think in Xeno Saga 3, that's like 2.5 hours long. It's ridiculous. Like, it's almost like you're watching a movie where it's going on, but they do the same thing there, where they really pull you in with the story, and it's just this really well written, sci-fi tale. And so you can definitely tell that they took what worked for, the development of the cutscenes and the story development in something like Xeno Saga, but then, trimmed down the cinematics at least a little bit and found a better way to tell the story in a much more coherent manner, while also, not losing any of the pacing with the story. Because that is one thing about Xeno Saga that a lot of people don't like, is that it definitely gets bogged down with a lot of the cutscenes. Like, it really feels like the pace of the game isn't there, like, to the point where it almost feels like you're watching a movie instead of playing a game. Whereas Xenoblade, I think, does a nice balance between the cutscenes and the gameplay itself.
Yeah, for sure. The characters are really, I like each and every one of them felt very personable. I won't go into like too much into detail in these characters and story. I want people to figure this game out and like this story out. So I think we can put a pin on it. Gameplay wise, I just want to mention Xenoblade Chronicles 1. It's probably my least favorite compared to like 2 and stuff like that. Actually, I get really mixed with 1 and 2 because they both have pros and cons. The first one, it's an automatic combat system where you go into this open world, go to a monster, and then once you're detected, you're in conflict. And so you have your main character that you control, and then you have 2 other side characters that you kind of manage, and you can actually control and switch out party members in between. But once you're in conflict, you have to beat the monsters, and then you're out of conflict. And so once you're in, there's a regular attack that just keeps on going, just like an MMO. It's just like you sword attack or whatever, and you're trying to bog the monsters down. As you go throughout the battle, your gauges on the bottom right increases and have a certain set of skills, and these skills can be whatever. They can be like an extra damage attack, they could be defense buffs or whatever your character's geared towards. Now, Xenoblade Chronicles 1, there's not like a specific class really associated with there, but there are skills that like, oh, this character is more like a tank. This character's more like a healer, and so on and so forth. And so even though they don't have set classes, they have like their own type of gameplay strategy to them. On top of that, there's the break, topple, and launch system in monsters, which is very important in all Xenoblade Chronicles games, where if you nail down a certain combo, you're basically adding additional damage onto a monster, and at the same time, they're not attacking you. So there's a lot of systems in the combat going on ever since the first game. I would say the second game, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, adds a little too much more to the combat, but that's basically what it is, and that's how the pacing goes. And then as you beat the monster, you can grab items from them, and then you can complete side quests, or you can make weapons, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I feel the combat's just serviceable. It's fine. I like to go through it, and it's like, okay, yep, I'm going through this combat system, and it's fine. And then there's some few extra bonuses as you like reach the true potential of the sword, the Monado with Shulk and whatever. So kind of some cool extra combos on top that makes it really satisfying in the combat. But other than that, I don't find the combat too active, too engaging. It was just fine for me.
And I actually think like the combat in this game in particular, just it feels like kind of like the perfect podcast game when it comes to the combat, because even though it's cool with the music swelling and stuff like that you hear while you're playing, I kind of like just listening to podcasts while playing this game because of how simple the combat is in a lot of scenarios. Or like I just feel like I can listen to a podcast while just chilling out and just running around and killing a bunch of monsters and stuff like that. So I thought that was interesting, and I think this one definitely feels the most MMO, like to the point where it also has like positional attacks as well, depending if you're attacking from the side or from the back as well. Like that's really important for certain special skills, which again is very similar to MMOs, because Final Fantasy 14 does that with all the characters in that game too. So it's very much like that. So moving on to our next game, kind of wrapping up Xenoblade Chronicles, we got to talk about Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U, pulling out our game pads. Garrett, did you ever play Xenoblade Chronicles X? Is this the one that you haven't played yet?
I've never owned this game.
Oh,
I've never owned a Wii U. I have to say I've tried it out on emulator, and it's just like I don't want to play too much of it because it just seems weird on PC. So I'm fine skipping it. I am not gonna go out of my way to get a Wii U to get this game. I think I'm okay. I hope they port it to Switch. If not, I don't feel like I'm losing too much. Yeah. But anyways, yeah, so, that's my experience.
Fun fact about Xenoblade Chronicles X for folks that don't know or have never played it, it's not connected at all to any of the other games as far as the story works.
Yes.
As far as the world is, like there's nothing really connected to the other games. In fact, this was almost like this was meant as like a soft reboot for Xenoblade Chronicles. And it's almost just Xenoblade Chronicles in name only. The combat system is similar to Xenoblade Chronicles in some ways. It's
kind of similar, yeah.
But it's not like, but it's totally a different game. Like
it's a way, very different game.
It reminds me of what happened with something like Super Mario Brothers 2 on the NES, where that was a completely different game that just, was rebranded as a Mario game. Like that's how I feel about Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which would probably explain why this is my favorite game that we're going to talk about today. Because I love Xenoblade Chronicles X, and you want to know the reason why, Garrett? Because I love Xenogears on the PlayStation 1, and this is just this is pretty much just a new Xenogears game, and I love it. I love Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U. So it's what they did this time around with Xenoblade Chronicles X specifically is they made it like Xenogears, where it's a mech RPG, where you have characters that fight on the ground, but then during combat, you can summon these giant mechs, and then you're fighting these giant monsters, and you almost have these, like, kaiju-style battles, where you've got your giant mech, and you're fighting this giant monster, and it feels like it's something out of, like, Pacific Rim or something like that. But it's still, similarly, almost turn-based-ish, like the Xenoblade Chronicles games as well. And I just really enjoyed running around this giant open world, killing monsters, upgrading my mechs, and just having a great time with X. Does it have the greatest story in the world? No. Is it really? Do I really need to expect the story to carry over to anything else, or for them to revisit it again? Probably not. But I really, really enjoyed X. I love the combat in it. I loved it, the mech aspect of it. Again, I love mechs. I love the Gundam series, for example. So I was all over this. I love X. I think it's one of the best.
It'll be lost in Wii U?
Yeah.
Yeah. Will it be lost in Wii U forever? Yeah. Will they ever port it?
They will never port this game, which makes me sad. And actually, PSA, speaking of the Wii U, I should mention that we know that the Wii U store is actually closing early next year. And if you ever want to play this game, because as I mentioned, I don't ever think it leaves Wii U at this point, so you will probably need a Wii U to play it. You will need to download the HD textures now. They're a free downloadable.
Oh my goodness!
They're a free downloadable content pack on the eShop, and you will no longer be able to download them after certain dates. So after the eShop store closes down, or if you haven't purchased them by August 23rd, then you will no longer be able to purchase the free DLC, which gives you the HD textures for the game, which makes the game look horrible. Like, it looks worse than the Wii version of Xenoblade Chronicles if you don't have these texture packs. So it's like, it's mandatory. Goodness. And the best part is, Garrett, even if you have the disc, it doesn't matter. You still need them. You still need to download all 15 gigs of data because they didn't include any of it on the disc. So you got to go and get these texture packs before they run out. If you have any interest at all in playing this game, which is just, it still boggles the mind, Garrett. I still don't understand how Nintendo does this, but yeah.
They locked it away, man. This game is not coming out. They had Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE coming out of the Wii U Gremlin locker, but they're not pulling this out of the depths of Wii U. I mean, I'm never going to say never, Garrett. I mean, you never know. Yeah. It's possible. Oh, I'm sure it will be on Wii U, Nintendo Switch Online in 2036 in our Switch 7. Well, how are they going to emulate the gamepad support, Garrett? Because all these games take advantage of the gamepad. Don't. Just don't. Like, how else are you going to play, you're on your Switch 3 when that happens? I actually played Xenoblade Chronicles X on PC just fine.
Yeah.
On a pro, you play on a pro controller, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like it would be just fine with a pro. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
not one of those games that like requires the gamepad to play. So you definitely can play it without it. So yeah, I still think it's possible that they ported it over, but I just think they just forgot about this game or they just don't care at this point. Because like honestly, Garrett, I think we would have seen it by now if they were going to do it. I think they would have released it after Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but before Xenoblade Definitive Edition came out. Or who knows? Maybe that's what they do between now and whenever Monolith Soft's next game is, because we're assuming it's not Xenoblade Chronicles after this. Maybe that's what they release to tide over Xenoblade fans for whatever Monolith Soft's got next or something like that. But I still really am doubtful we see it. But I would love to, because I think this game's great and more people just need to play it. So there you go. But moving on to Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I as I talked about earlier, I played this game when the Switch came out, and did like the game for a bit, but I'm just going to come out and say it. I know Console Kato said this too, but I kind of echo this as well. I just don't like Rex, the main character, at all in this game. And it also is just like between that and the poor performance of this game, I'm just like, I just can't do this. Like, as much as I'd like Pyro.
You don't like the character, like the personality of Rex at all? No, I just
don't like anything about him. It makes me sad.
So that's interesting. I would say Xenoblade Chronicles 2 it's good. I think the story's good. And the combat's a little better than the first one. It is so anime though, like way more anime than the first one. It is. I feel like the first one is pretty mature with its themes, with its cutscenes. With it was ruthless. It actually felt like a kind of a Japanese version of The Last of Us, where it just felt like you're on edge like the whole time. Two, it's like Dragon Ball is like, all right, I'm not as powerful. Okay, the next scene, I'm even more powerful because I believe in my friends. I'm like, oh my goodness, oh gosh, it's gonna be one of those games. But I feel like, yeah, okay. So Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Are you still there, Ryan?
I'm still here. I see that you're frozen.
Yeah, he froze.
Your face is frozen, Garrett.
Hold on.
Oh, I see you back now. Can you see me now? Garrett, are you still with me, good sir?
Wow. Is it me?
I think it might be Garrett. Who is disconnected. I also see on the live stream that we're there. In fact, I'll talk to Garrett in the Discord. Oh. And now I'm just talking to myself, folks. You're just seeing this giant window of just me, just hanging out here on this call by my lonesome, talking about Xenoblade. I hope everyone's having a good night tonight. I see we got 5 people in chat. Thank you so much for coming out and watching our Xenoblade episode. Hopefully we'll be able to get Garrett back momentarily to talk more about, because we still got lots more to talk about, which is just crazy to think about. Oh, I see a Garrett connecting. Hello, Garrett, you back?
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
You totally froze, and then you kept saying you couldn't hear me, even though I could hear you, and then you disconnected the call. Oh. So, I don't know what happened. Discord, broke under the epicness of our conversation about Xenoblade.
Apparently, okay. Yes. Okay. I'll be very brief about Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Yeah, I think the character, so it's very similar to the first Xenoblade Chronicles game, where your ragtag game, and Rex is the main character in this one. And you kind of just try to figure out, it's a completely different world, the Xenoblade Chronicles 1. It's not a direct sequel or anything. They're kind of connected, but you can honestly play 2 by itself. Rex is this kind of this salvager that's kind of like, he goes down to the inner depths of the Cloud Seas in order to get treasure and to make a living. He lives on the back of a Titan, a very small Titan, and there's many different Titans around in this world. And then a bunch of stuff happens, but basically he is connected with this this person named Pyra, or I would say Blade, named Pyra, who is this ultimate weapon or whatever. And you are trying to get to the tree of life, the center tree that's in the middle of everything, in order to figure out what's going on with all the Titans that are kind of just dying off. in a way. And so they want to get to like all the way to the top of this tree in order to find some eternal paradise that they dreamed about. And so that's kind of like the synopsis of the story. And so as I mentioned, Pyra is this blade. In this world, there is a driver and blade system. And so what I mean by that is that the driver is like the regular person, a human or other species or whatever, and they have a connection to a weapon named it's called a blade. And this blade can be any type of class, any kind of sword or whatever, but they actually draw its energy from ether, which is actually coming from the Titans. And so in order to attain a blade, you get this like crystal core or whatever, you awaken it, and then you automatically have a bond with it. A lot of blades are specialized, and that's what you encounter a lot throughout the game, but probably like most of the blades are kind of this just uh, blank slate, bionicle type of weird thing going on. But yeah, so there's this blade driver system. On top of the combat, there's this lottery system where you get a bunch of these crystal cores that I've been mentioning, and you open them up and you can get a random blade or whatever. And you can get kind of these common blades or super rare blades that you want to put in your party. And so, and then it gets pretty complicated because you got drivers in their own skills, you got blades in their own skills, you got the bonds between them, you got the weapons between them, and it becomes this whole hodgepodge type of thing. I think they went a little too far on the systems here, got a little too complex, and that's where I kind of just like became disinterested with the combat a little bit. I liked how they include a little bit more combo systems in the combat itself, where a blade is associated with an element. And so you can have these combinations of elements throughout like a battle or whatever, and it becomes ultimate attacks. It has some ultimate animation scenes. It becomes really cool like that and pretty satisfying. And then, yeah, the map system is not the best in the world in this one either. There are 3 layers. There's literally 3 layers of maps. There's the overworld map, there's within the Titan map, and then within the area map, and it gets really complicated. And like it doesn't show any height or whatever differential or whatever, so it becomes pretty easy to get lost in this world.
That is one thing I remember about this game, Garrett, from playing it. It was very easy to get lost in this game for that reason, where it was like, it says my objective's here, and I'm standing on top of it. That means I got to find like some level down I need to go to, and it would usually lead to 20 or 30 more minutes of trying to figure out where I'm supposed to go next. But yeah, like you hit the nail on the head with it, because I do think one of the biggest problems with this game is just it is overly complicated. They tried too much stuff with this one, I think. Yeah. Which just led to some problems with it, where I liked more of the simplistic method with the first one, which is one of the reasons why I was let down with the second one, combined with how I felt about Rex too. But I got like, decently far. I got to chapter 7 in this game, and that's kind of where I put this game down, because, I was having...
You were close then.
Yeah, I just didn't care anymore. I was like, there's other games that are out now.
I get it.
I need other games to play, but I know a lot of people really love Xenoblade Chronicles 2 a lot, and I replaying it now, Garrett, because I know, again, you just finished it pretty recently. Did replaying it now give you like a new appreciation for the game, or do you still kind of feel the same way like when it first came out, or what do you think?
I like it a lot more now that I played Xenoblade Chronicles 1, because I kind of know what I was getting into. I felt like when I initially started 2, I had no idea what I was getting into at that point. I had a better idea what the combat was, what the direction was, and I like how unique this sequel is. It is its own game. I really like the characters in this one too. It's a much different type of theme though. It's just basically a gang getting together to an end objective, and you have some kind of relationship with the villains throughout the whole game as well. Much more closely than the first one. The first one seems like the villains are just plain evil, whereas this one, the villains are a lot more complex. And the themes around their characters, like, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Like, what you're the anti-hero. I understand why you're the anti-hero. There's a lot of great plot twists in this one as well. It kept me on my toes, and I was able to mainline the game, most of it. I actually did some side stuff, but I mainlined most of it. It took about 50 hours or so to beat this game, so not bad actually. And I really enjoyed the like closer to the ending of it. And of course, I brought the difficulty down to easy. Guys, I don't know what it is with these games, but when I get to the boss fights, it's one of those like I give up. Like I don't want to try to advance my levels. I don't want to try to figure out what I'm doing wrong. I want to figure out what the next scene is, so let me bump it down to
You mean to
easy
tell me
and
you don't want to
get
just
through
go
it.
back and kill a bunch of, bunnies or whatever enemies are just around just to get more, grind for more XP and then go? No, no one wants to do that. Like, I hear that.
And
a
the
lot.
weird thing is the experience, like it gives you levels, and of course you get a little bit stronger, but like you can't really gauge it that much. Like you could be 5 or 6 levels ahead and still get your butt kicked. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And I legit looked up YouTube videos. And actually, one person from the community actually suggested a YouTube video for me before I played the game. So guys, just look out there. There's some kind of tips on the combat and how to like buff up your characters in the beginning of the game to make it way easier for you, because the game does not tell you everything in the combat system. So
Of
there you
course it
go.
doesn't. Of course it doesn't. Like, why would it? Why would they want this game to be easy or, manageable in some cases?
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I have no problem bumping a game down to easy if I find like I'm, hitting my head against the wall, or if I know like the difference between me switching to easy or leaving it on normal is just me going back and grinding for 4 hours and then coming back to the same point. At that point, I know that it's just I will always just switch it to easy instead. Like that's just the better road I think to go down. And I like to when games give you the option to switch that midway, because not every JRPG lets you do that. So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, moving on, Garrett, tell me about Torna.
Yes. So I'll mention a little bit about the DLCs on both. So I did play Future Connected in 2020. That is the direct sequel of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 with the adventure of Shulk and Milia. Milia is one of the main characters in the first game, and she is kind of like this princess that's kind of a half-breed in her society, and she's trying to get her kind of her empire or her group kind of back together at peace in this land that's kind of like hostile. And so Future Connected, really cool. I love how bite-sized it is. It is about 20 hours or so of gameplay. There's some new additional combat stuff on top of the original game, but overall it is a kind of, think of like a big expansive story, very similar to like Witcher 3 expansions, very similar to like Skyrim, where it's just this, it's its own story, and you can play it by itself without the knowledge or the previous game or the main game. So there's Future Connected, and then Torna. Yeah, okay. So Torna is very similar, where it's like its own story. This one is set 500 years before the original Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and has its own story as well. But it's referred a lot throughout the main story, and so you have a lot of the blades. So the blades, whenever the driver dies, the blade goes back into the core, and when it's awakened again, it'll be its same form, like forever. But their memories are wiped, and so you see a lot of the blades and their past selves in this game. It's pretty interesting how everything unfolds. I know how the ending of this game is because of the main story, and so I'm intrigued by that and trying to figure out how did it unfold the way it is now. It is bite-sized as well. It's about 20 hours, but I think one of the biggest fallbacks of this game are you oh man, are you stuck again?
No, I'm not stuck.
Why am I stuck again? Okay.
You're actually in motion right now, Garrett.
Man, I'm sorry, Ryan. I can't hear you. I don't know what's going on.
And once again, we have lost Garrett, folks. I apologize for all of the technical issues we're having this evening, I don't know what's going on. I think Discord just doesn't like us, or we've been on the call too long. There's also that possibility too. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Oh man, sorry, I was having too much fun, jumping between these boxes. Well, I'm gonna just, while we're waiting for Garrett to come back here, I just want to, mention I'm playing Live Alive as well right now, and man, that game's really good too. I actually really like Live Alive. I think it's a really good remake of a game that I just never got to play back in the day. And I think it's a super fun game. So I know. Oh, you came back. Ryan. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Is it my internet? It could be my.
It could be your internet.
Mm-hmm. I'm so sorry about that. I'll be real quick. Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll be real quick with Torna here. It is bite-sized like Future Connected. It's its own story. It's very similar to the second game. I think it does a lot better job with streamlining the combat compared to the main story. I know a lot of people played this before too, which was interesting, or by itself. You can do that. This game has like very little connection with the second game, even though the second game kind of refers back to it like a lot. But I think the main drawback of this game is the forced side quests of this game. Have you heard of this?
I heard you talking about add-on Shack this week, but it also, anytime I hear anyone mention that that's in a game, it's an instant turn off for me. It makes me sad.
So they did it once by like, okay, you have this community level where it's like, okay, you got to make it to level 2 with this community level. That means you do a lot of side quests and make sure your people are in the community. And so I was like, okay, I can get to level 2. That's fine. And then the next time was like, okay, you did one main mission. Now get to level 4. And I'm like, and that's like at least 20-ish side quests.
Of course.
And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do this. I refuse to be force-fed side quests as a progression system in the main story. I haven't seen this much at all in a RPG in general. I maybe some that kind of suggested it, but this is straight up like go do side quests in order to progress. I instantly turned off when I saw that, and it was just this past week, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna watch the rest of the cutscenes on YouTube. I don't care. I'm not gonna be forced to do side quests like this. So yeah, that's my experience with Torna.
That's like the weirdest thing too. Is like people keep like I hear people just praise Torna. They're like, this is the best Xenoblade Chronicles, content out there, and I'm like, you're not making it sound too appealing, Garrett. I'm a little bit worried.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know with some people. I guess like a lot of people, this is their first game that they actually go to, which is interesting. And it's good. I love the presentation in the beginning of it. It's just when they kind of force me to do side quests, and the side quest stuff is very similar to the second game. It's not like any different or spectacular or anything like that. It's just like, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing optional stuff as a requirement like this. So, and it gets very petty with their side quests, like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, where you have to like level up certain attributes of your blades in order to get like these skill checks, forestry and trees and plants and whatever. It was to the point where I had to craft something to make a favorite dessert item for this person, and I have to give it to them 5 times in order to level up a skill check where I can pass off in a side quest. Oh my gosh. That's not good. That's not good design at all in a side quest. It's just terrible. So Torna, I can't finish it.
Hearing you explain that character just breaks my brain. It makes me sad. And makes me a little bit, less excited because I do have my copy of Torna coming later this week. Because I ordered it like 4 months ago. And I've been waiting for it to come ever since, and it'll be here this week. So there's that. But I know we're kind of on borrowed time, Garrett, with your internet. So I think we should skip right ahead to Xenoblade Chronicles 3. We're not going to say too much about it because I think maybe we do something for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 when we play it. But I do want us to at least talk about, I want to gauge your hype, Garrett. Where is your hype level for Xenoblade Chronicles 3? How, like, stupidly excited are you for this game on Friday?
I am through the roof excited for this game just because of all the positive things that I've been saying about Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2. The story is fantastic. I've read a couple of reviews and I've seen the gameplay. I've seen what it looks like. It looks so much better than 2. It looks so much better. Like the UI looks clean. The combat looks great. I thank you for getting rid of the driver blade system. I just get rid of it altogether. I all around, I'm very excited for this game. Even I've read a couple of reviews. I watched 3 reviews as well, and like I think I'm on par of expectations of what I'm gonna get out of this game. So very excited about Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Yeah. What about you?
I'm actually more excited than I was when it was first announced. Like, this was a game that, you know, I was like, it's fine. It's more Xenoblade. Like, I'm glad, you know, Xenoblade fans are getting excited about this one. But then as we started to learn more and more about this game, Garrett, I got just more excited about it because I feel like this kind of fixes a lot of the stuff I had problems with in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And I liked Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and X a lot. So I think it's closer to that, and while also doing some new stuff as well. And that's exactly what I want from a game like this. And plus, it looks like a lot of the performance issues are out the window too. So I'm stoked for this game. I'm actually pretty excited that it's coming on Friday. I'm probably not going to start it right away because I'm actually playing Live Alive right now. So I kind of want to play that first. Plus, I do kind of want to finish another Xenoblade game before I play this. I just knew because I wanted to have the collector's edition. Like if I didn't order it now, I was never going to get it. And likewise, physical copies too are going to be, I imagine, very rare for this game beyond, you know, day one or even the first couple of weeks. So I was just like, I had no problem just picking it up right away and putting it on my shelf until later whenever I'm ready to play it. So, but I am actually pretty excited for this. Like, I'm more excited for this than I've ever been for a Xenoblade game, which says a lot. So I'm actually pretty excited for this one to come out on Friday. And I hope Xenoblade fans in particular actually get, you know, everything they want from this one as well. Well, to round out this conversation, Garrett, we got more questions from the community. And also, you know, we asked people what their hype level was for Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So I want us to touch on that before we go, and hopefully before Garrett's internet breaks again. So we're going to start with FamousSeumas, the most famous of all Seumases, who asked the question. And actually, he asked 3 questions here. 1, this might be, I might as well ask the obvious. Should I play the other Xenoblade Chronicles games before playing 3? Garrett, as the person who's finished all the Xenoblade Chronicles games, because I haven't, what do you think? What do you think FamousSeumas should do?
I've read some reviews of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and I would say you don't have to. Okay. It's a separate world enough by itself that you will have pretty much the same experience as anyone that has played beforehand. But I would say they are connected in some way, especially the first 2. It's clear as day how they're connected. Now it's still pretty separate. Like, their stories are they're really separate, but the worlds are connected somehow. So take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah. And actually, too, I think it's a better starting point than probably Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was for the things that we talked about when you were talking about that, where the combat wasn't very approachable for newcomers to the series. And whereas I think 3 sounds like it fixes that in a big way as well. So I'm actually in agreement with Garrett. I actually think, like, even if I decided not to go back and pick up the other Xenoblade games, I would actually probably feel okay jumping into this one and having this be my first. So there you go. But Seamus also asked, what are some of your favorite characters or favorite tracks from the soundtracks from the other games? Again, we won't go too in depth with this one, especially too, because I don't know about you, Garrett, but because it's been so long since I played these games, I just don't really go back and listen to the Xenoblade soundtracks, so I don't really have like any particular themes in mind for favorite music. But what do you got for me? What do you got for this question?
You know, soundtracks, I don't really listen too much of the music of Xenoblade Chronicles games. Like, I know they're there, but I haven't found any of them have like a good background music or whatever. Like, they're just fine. Torna, I do like the battle encounter music. It's like this kind of jazzy type of music with piano and some dissonance in there. So I feel like that's cool. It's really annoying in 2 where the cutscenes, their music is super loud and the character voices are super soft. And so you can't really make out what they're saying. And I'm like, I know this is trying to be emotional and everything, but I literally can't hear right now. So I felt the music a little bit more nuisance than anything from the Xenoblade Chronicles games, but I'm sure they're fine. I'm sure they're great. Favorite characters, I would say top 3. Mithra from Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And then Nia as well from Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Those two, like I guess, female characters. They have their own attitude. They have their own personality. They don't care what other people think about them, and like they have their own drives and goals. And I think that's really cool. And then also Melia from the first game. She is a really cool character as well. Trying to be a leader, and she goes through a lot of struggles throughout her story arc as well. So those are my top 3 Xenoblade characters for sure.
Nice. Yeah, actually, like even though I didn't love Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I actually think you had 2 great, picks from that game as far as characters are concerned. Mm-hmm. I like Nia a lot. I like, her sassiness, and I like Mithra a lot as well. So actually, I think you've got some good character choices there. And then Xenoblade Chronicles 1, I actually really like Shulk a lot too. I know Shulk's that's kind of an easy answer, but I just like his character. I like his style. So I wanted to give him a bit of a shout out here, but yeah, I think you've got a good list there, Garrett. But next up, we got Gags at On Gags is his name on Twitter. They asked the question, how expansive do we think the story DLC for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is going to be? Because we do know that there's that I think it's $30 that is the season pass for it. Is it going to be future connected, Torna, Golden Country level expensiveness? How big do you think this DLC is, Garrett? I think they're going to kind of do similar size to Torna, Torna is probably what I would expect for the size of this DLC. But what do you think? What do you think they're going to do? Because they haven't said.
I agree. Yes, because Xenoblade Chronicles 2 expansion pass was $30 as well and include Torna. They're just going through the same thing here. $30, it'll be this new expansion. Looking at the icon, there's like a 3rd sword in there. So and there's the 3 swords, the sword from the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and Rex's sword and Shulk's sword. So I'm sure there's some type of connection going on in this expansion. So there you go. Hint, hint.
Yeah. And it'll even, I'm going to go out on record right now and say it'll probably be, bought standalone like Torna as well. So you could probably buy it separately.
Yes.
As well from the season pass. Next up, we got, 2 people who weighed in on about how excited they are for this. Quagmire on the Discord says, so my hype level is off the charts for this game. I think the last game I was hyped for this much was Diablo 3, being an avid Diablo 2 player back in the day. My question for you guys is, Xenoblade has been relatively niche for Nintendo. It seems like they are marketing this one heavier than the previous installments in the series, and the quality of life improvements that have been announced appear to make it the most accessible Xenoblade Chronicles game to date. Does 3 have a chance to hit the mainstream like Persona 5 did a few years ago? So I personally, as the non-Xenoblade fan of the two of us, I mean, again, I don't hate the games, but I'm just definitely not of the Xenoblade fan that Garrett is in this way. I still don't think it'll be enough to breach the mainstream. I think it'll probably be the best-selling Xenoblade game if I had to guess. But I don't think it's going to do more than something like Metroid Dread does, as far as, sales numbers does. Like, I don't know if it breaks 3 million sales because it is a niche thing. Because you have to consider even very popular JRPG series don't sell over that number either. Like there are exceptions to that, but for the most part, most series are not like that. Like even Persona 5, for example, has barely sold
like
more.
5 million?
Yeah.
Or something like that?
It's not even a huge amount, right? So, and not only that too, but what Persona 5 had going for it was the fact that it was on PlayStation 4 at a time like where just over, like so many people were playing RPGs on PlayStation 4. Like PlayStation 4, I think is more known as an RPG console than Switch is to some people. Like, yes, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great RPGs on Switch, but I feel like at the time Persona 5 came out, there were more people playing RPGs on PlayStation 4 than there are people like entrenched in RPGs on Switch currently. Combined with the fact too that just Persona is a more easy series to get into because none of the games are connected at all in any way, shape, or form, and they're so visually different from each other anyways. That's just like, that's what brought people into Persona 5 more than anything. Whereas I just don't know if Xenoblade can really get there. Especially with its like sci-fi in nature too, which just, I think just appeals to less people than, you know, walking around a modern day city and it being more grounded in reality that something like Persona is. But Garrett, what do you think? Am I off base with this?
It's a very good question. I think you hit a really good points about the comparison with Persona 5. I think what really had Persona 5 going was its like fan base like really cheering for it, and also being on PS4 and having that style, like that JRPG style. The music is very, very inviting. The combat's turn-based, so I think that's a little bit more approachable than Xenoblade is. I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has the potential to have the highest sales compared to its previous installments. And I think there's a reason why they brought over the definitive edition over to Switch to bring more people into the fan base and get hyped for the third game. I think the Switch fan base is the largest. It's huge now. And I think its Nintendo fan base is, even though a lot of them don't play RPGs, are very interested in, is like, oh, this game that's Nintendo published, that it's like its latest game ever that's coming out on Switch. I don't think a lot of people know this, that Monolith Soft helps out Zelda series a lot. But I think the Nintendo fans do. And at least like a lot of them do. And so I think they're intrigued about this game. I think you're right. I don't think it's going to be mainstream. I don't think it's going to be popular. I think it's because of the inherent nature of Xenoblade series. Like, it's not too approachable for newcomers, for new RPG fans. I would highly suggest Mario plus Rabbids. I would highly suggest other role-playing games compared to Xenoblade first, just because of how as I explained it, how convoluted everything can be. But I still think there's a reason why Nintendo's really pushing it. They've been advertising this game a lot more than Alive, which is an interesting thing to do. They've been really pushing this more than any other previous Xenoblade Chronicles game. So I think they see the untapped potential still in this type of series. So I'm very interested to see these sales from Xenoblade Chronicles 3.
Absolutely. And I think we've heard anecdotally as well, just from people we know in the community, that, you know, a lot of people are saying that this is going to be their first game that they're picking up for Xenoblade Chronicles. So I think a lot more people are going to get into it, but it's just, I don't see it hitting, you know, the same stride as Persona 5, but you never know. It might get closer. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people said the same thing about Fire Emblem Awakening. And that game almost, you know, was the end of the Fire Emblem series, and it totally turned everything around with how well it sold on 3DS. But I think it was also timing too, had a lot to do with it. And I do think the July window, I think, works a little bit better in its favor than when, you know, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 came out in December, as an example.
Yes.
So I do think, I think there's a lot going for this one. But last comment comes to us from Nagachaka, at Nagashaka, who says, my hype levels are off the chart for the game and my expectations are unreasonably high since this game needs to make up for the disappointment that was Mario Strikers and what that caused for us all. I mean, it's got that Daisy DLC now. You never know. Mario Strikers might come back, but probably not. Probably not. But
nice.
There you go. So those are our Xenoblade Chronicles questions. But Garrett, we got one more question this week that has nothing to do with Xenoblade Chronicles at all. So we're going to read it. This comes to us from Brian Eck on the Discord, who says, what are some of your favorite isometric RPG games, and what game would you recommend for a newcomer to isometric RPGs? Now, Garrett, we've talked about isometric RPGs before, because isometric RPGs are also known as CRPGs, or computer RPGs, and neither of us are really super into them. So I don't know if we're really the experts to talk about it, but Brian, if you're as a newcomer, to answer your question as far as what game I would recommend, if you have an Xbox and you have Game Pass, one game I'd actually recommend to check out is Wasteland 3. It's a post-apocalyptic.
Wasteland 3 is a good one.
Yeah, it's a post-apocalyptic XCOM style isometric RPG that's just got this like really wacky sense of humor to it. Like it very much feels like the Fallout games. So if you've played any of the Fallout games before, you'll feel right at home with this one. This is a game that both me and Sean Capri, when this came out, like we were both very skeptical about this game, but as soon as we picked it up, we were like, this game's amazing. Like we had a ton of fun playing it for a couple weeks and then talking about it. So that's the game I would probably recommend is like the best way to start, especially if you're a console player. But otherwise, like our favorite isometric RPGs, like I just don't have many to choose from because it's just not a genre that I've been super into. Like I like Baldur's Gate 2 and Icewind Dale and stuff like that, but even then I'm like, they're not even some of my favorite RPGs. But Garrett, I gotta ask you, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll definitely suggest, on top of Wasteland 3, Mario plus Rabbids is kind of like an isometric role-playing game. I guess you can say they're XCOM-like. I like that. That's a subgenre within itself. So it's a good XCOM-like game. I would suggest Diablo 3 is like my easy go-to isometric role-playing game. It's an action isometric role-playing game. I would play on Switch. I think it's great on Switch unless you want to connect with other friends and play on PC or something else. Diablo 4 is about to come out next year, and it's fantastic loot grinding role-playing game. And I heard Divinity Original Sin 2 is fantastic, and that's actually cross-save between Switch and Steam.
Yeah.
So go check that one out as well.
Yeah, and Divinity is like, the only thing I would say about Divinity is it's a lot more hardcore into this genre.
It's very hardcore.
And it's very systems based, so it's not the game I would start with. Like I would start, to your point, Garrett, with something more like Mario plus Rabbids or any of the Diablo games. Just pick one. They're all great. Like I think those would be the places to start. Or like I mentioned, Wasteland 3 I think is also a good starting point. But Divinity is the game that like once you get a game or two under your belt, that's the game maybe you go to from there.
Yeah.
And see if you like it. The nice thing about Diablo 2 or any of the Diablo games is that they're probably going to be on Game Pass next year. So
probably
you might not even have to go and buy them, especially Diablo 4. Oh my God. I can't wait for that to be like a day one Game Pass game, Garrett. Like
that would be
that's
great.
Gonna be so good. But anyways, we got to get going before Garrett's internet gets shut down on us. So before we go, Garrett, let's go.
You can follow me on Twitter at Blaine Explosion. You can also find me on the Nintendo Shack, part of the Play Some Video Games Podcast Network, where we're live every Thursday evenings over at twitch.tv/PSVG, and we release on all podcast services, including Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, and other things. So go check us out over there. And that's pretty much it.
All the places where pods are caught, you can go get it there. Well, as for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. I don't tweet much, but you can go follow me there anyways if you want to. You can follow us on Twitter as well at Carpool Gaming. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Carpool Gaming and on podcast services around the globe. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been level 57 of the RPG Cave, and go play some Xenoblade Chronicles 3, fam, and we're out.
Bye-bye.